technique in this poster.
Yeah.
So we got into I think the color scheme first,
Yeah.
we went blue.
What makes that an exciting, from a pacing perspective, an exciting thing?
Okay, so here's what we've noticed, but here's why it matters.
Yeah.
And with the definition of propaganda that I gave them, and I could have leveraged this a little bit earlier. So, okay, let me read it actually. So it's a little bland, or theoretical. So propaganda is communication designed to influence people's thoughts and behavior. It's the spreading of ideas to support or attack an institution, a cause, or a person. Okay, it's pretty boring. The follow-up that because I've done this a couple of times already before this class, and I was like, what's a more exciting way to do this?
Mm-hmm.
It's like, it's mind control.
Mm.
Okay, so what are the mind control techniques? And I could be even more explicit about this in the future.
Mm-hmm.
Which of these techniques controls your brain, or does the most to control your brain, or manipulate your brain, and why?
Mm-hmm.
So, okay, that gets them into subtler stuff, where it's like, it's not just red, white, and blue. It's like, okay, if I do this, I love my country. I'm a good person. I'm a patriot.
Mm-hmm.
If I don't do this, I'm a bad person, potentially treasonous.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. The perspective was the kicker, though, because when I had them stand up, and so I explained how it worked, right? Like, this is the Mona Lisa.
You had Mona Lisa queued up and ready to...
So this is the Mona Lisa effect. And I've heard some student like, it's kind of like the Mona Lisa, the eyes, whatever.
Yeah.
So, okay. That helped it be a little more student-generated as well.
Sure.
So, all right, we're going to, break the mold of what we've been doing a little bit. So instead of just sitting there and talking about it, I want you to see this for yourselves. So stand up, walk around the room, and keep your eyes focused on either the eyes or the finger, the two things that are pointing straight out, and see what happens. And then when they do that, it's like, oh. And then it's like, oh, this is creepy. Sam Hirsch was like, I want to go to the side,
he was like,
it's like all the way over
leaning
here.
out the window, yeah.
Where do I have to go to get away from this thing?
Yeah.
So that was the moment where everything kind of opened up, and it's like, okay. The deeper learning, I think, that there's a connection between the objectives of this thing, what it's trying to get you to do, and these little tricks that are being played to get you to do it. Okay, that's
what was engaging about them. So getting back to the question of pacing, what was interesting for them about that? Why do they want to keep thinking about that and talking about that?
Because they experienced it firsthand, what that technique, the technique of perspective, does to you as the viewer. And it got them interacting with it as a viewer, not just like an analyst. So it wasn't an intellectual game at that point, or an intellectual exercise. It was something that they were actually experiencing. And there's an empathy kind of connection there, right? And actually Joe Hirsch took this by talking about, okay, if you're in a crowd of young men looking at this poster,
I remember that.
What does that do to you if you're here or here, no matter where you are in relation to the poster?
Right.
Like thinking about the context in which this would have been put up. So now it's like, what would it have been like to be in the context where this poster actually existed? So by experiencing that, the impact of the perspective technique, it helped them achieve that kind of empathy piece, which I hadn't even thought about, by the way, as a piece for this. Like that this is in some ways an empathy exercise.
Yeah.
What does it mean to be a viewer of one of these things? How is it supposed to make you feel or act? How is it, manipulating your brain? Yeah. So that got them a little taste of that firsthand kind of.
So it's making it's I taking that personal connection that I now feel to this piece and contextualizing it in 1917 and asking so now let's think about what's going on in 1917 and then how does it and I think on some level that's what we're always asking them to do, so you may be outraged by this document about slavery, but now we're forced to ask, okay, how could somebody possibly believe this in 1848 or whatever? So I that was my take on this also. I think that's what really but I think there's more to it also. I think that you are also asking them to evaluate, and there's something interesting about comparative evaluation when you have to decide, okay, what is? This is getting back to what you were saying before. Your question was which technique feels more powerful to you or feels more effective to you. And so that requires, there's an open-endedness to that. There's a puzzle that, there was something about it that was worth solving. What made the puzzle worth solving?
I think that's a really good question. I think there's a lot of potential answers to that. I'm not sure there's just one.
Yeah.
But I think on the longest term or deepest kind of learning from that is that it opens your eyes to the ways in which you are being manipulated or people are trying to manipulate your brain.
Mm-hmm.
And that there are really specific things that you can actually parse out, right?
Mm-hmm.
And take a step back from something that's being projected into your brain, advertising, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And it disarms it if you're able to do that.
Yeah.
So I think that's the most important. Like, for me anyway, I think that's the most important. I think there's a lot of more immediate learnings that happen for this unit in particular. Mm-hmm. So understanding that these posters are both simple and sophisticated, and that the message is usually something that is hitting over the head with a frying pan. But the techniques that go along with it, there's hidden messages too.
Incredibly subtle
and you can decode those if you have the right vocabulary and you know what to look for.
Right, and I think that yes, I think and I think there's something to the familiarity of the piece that draws me in also, which is to say that you take something that people have probably walked by a million times and seen, thinking okay, whatever, pointing, Uncle Sam pointing, whatever, it seems almost quaint. And then to look at it as something far more sophisticated than what you originally thought it was and having an impact on you in a way that you didn't even know, forces you to look at what you think of as an everyday image in a much different way, and then probably then opens your eyes to other things every day. And you start wondering.
That's what I care about the most. That I hope students take away from this.
Right. So if that worked as well as it did, and I think this is my analysis as well. Pacing was perfect. I think that you had multiple activities moving from giving the kids just enough time and space to answer it and analyze, and then you switch over to a new thing. All right, let's get up and follow the finger around, and now let's think about what the impact of that is. So it's moving. You have different calling on different parts of the brain, and it all worked. So you got them to the end, and they're super excited. And then the second half of it, the kids did not necessarily get. So what would you have done to leverage all of those ways that made part one so good? How could you latch them on to wanting to solve the puzzle? Well, let's back up.
Yeah. So I know I have an answer to what you have.
Go ahead. Yeah.
A possible one.
Yeah.
So instead of having them do 3 posters from the Cultural Revolution, give them one, and give them the last one. So it's the Down to the Countryside poster where the youth are smiling, waving the little red book on a train. The train's steaming away from you. And so that's the perspective. But you're outside the train.
Yeah.
And you're on the platform.
Yeah.
And the message is, get on this train.
Yes.
And go out to the countryside and do what Mao's telling you to do.
Yeah.
Okay. Looking at that image initially, they will have no idea, okay, what is this? What's the point? This I don't know what this is.
Right.
Why are we looking at this?
Right.
The puzzle that they're figuring out is, okay, to contextualize this poster first. What was the purpose of this, and what was going on in the story of the Cultural Revolution, right? So what were the objectives of this piece? What were they trying to get people to do? And then,
did they know anything about, what was their knowledge of the Cultural Revolution in that moment?
So, let's see. They'd done kind of a part 1 framing activity for that, where they did an in-class paragraph looking at 4 different sources from the Cultural Revolution to try to figure out why youth got swept up in this event. And that was the Sheikh lesson, so we did that in kind of modified form. So they had looked at a timeline of the event, they had looked at these sources, they shared in a kind of general sense what it was about.
And you were satisfied that they had a basic understanding of it?
Yeah. Okay. They were coming out of the India, the DBQ, and this is an easier version of that.
Yeah.
So, okay. This piece was taking them into more detail. So what were actually these different moments during the Cultural Revolution?
So they didn't know
And-
until that moment that there were chapters of the cultural.
Yeah, that's right. So they knew that it was like a thing that was happening, but they didn't necessarily know about like the four olds and
Right.
you know why the headquarters and stuff like that.
Oh, that's interesting because when you asked, they pretty quickly were able to describe, or at least a handful of them that talked in that moment, were able to describe there was a thing called the four olds. They seemed to get that.
Yeah.
Okay.
And you know there was like background in the slides as well for that discussion.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
it should hopefully be fresh in their brains.
Yeah.
So give them the one poster that comes at the end of the story.
Okay.
And say, all right, your job is to contextualize this and figure out like, I'm not sure what the big thought question, as you put it, would be. Like